All right, we are live on a Saturday. My first time I've streamed on this channel in 3 weeks or so. Hoping everyone is doing well, and I hope it's a nice day in your part of the world. We are here with the person I've been streaming with every week, at least once a week since then, Mr. Trad Patrick of Rights and Duties, as well as our guests, Mr. Charles Coloumbe and Brother Martin Navarro. How are you today, Charles?
Pretty well. Great to be here.
And Brother Martin, how are you?
Doing well. Beautiful Saturday morning here. So
it is a beautiful and cold morning here in central Oklahoma, and it's only going to get more of that as we get into the season. So today's topic is sort of this large overview of why is traditionalists sort of almost verboten now in the church, but really we're focusing on the concept of independent bishops and independent clergy, because there is a phenomenon in the church right now, or has been, I guess at least since the council, if not well before that, of the existence of, independent bishops who are validly consecrated bishops in the church. Although I guess in the church also becomes kind of a fluid concept when we get there, as well as independent priests. And I had the idea for this when listening to the patron-only pre-show of the Tumber House podcast, where a couple weeks ago, the one where that has been almost universally lauded as probably one of the finest that you and Vincent have done, Charles, where you talked about the concept of these independent bishops in the church. And I know that there are also independent priests. And without the, I want to say, Halloween part of that story, because I want people to go and check out that podcast episode, maybe we can begin by talking about what is an independent bishop and sort of how we got to the place where that actually exists in the church.
Well, to tell you the truth, it's literally a long story going back to the 19th century, starting anyway. Basically what happened was that you had a series of different schisms in different places. The first and best known was the Old Catholic Church of Utrecht, which back in the 18th century, or back 17th century really, but at any rate, they became sort of an independent setup. They split with the church over Jansenism, but they retained the apostolic succession. And then in 1870, when the Vatican I defined infallibility, certain bishops, a few priests and laymen in Germany, Switzerland, and so on, left the church over the doctrine of infallibility and linked up with the Jansenists in the Netherlands. And together they formed what were called the Old Catholics. Interestingly, they said at the time that they were Old Catholics because they were resisting what they called the innovations of Vatican I. But over the next several years, they got rid of clerical celibacy, Latin in the Mass. They got rid of Trent. So what started out as a protest against innovation turned into a kind of a revolutionary thing itself. Now, those Old Catholics have priestesses and bishopesses. But having said all of that, they provided orders, valid orders, to several people outside the church. Some of them were fairly stable, like the Polish National Catholic Church in the United States. But others, and I'm thinking now of two gentlemen in particular, one was named René Villatte, and the other was called Arnold Harris Matthew. They consecrated as bishops a number of men, who consecrated as bishops a number of men, who consecrated as bishops a number of men. And from all them consecrations have come down to the present an awful lot of bishops who have basically create churches according to their own taste. So I mean, it can be anything you like. Let's say that I'm very interested in the Celtic Church, as I presume it existed prior to 600. But I'm also interested in the Mozarabic Church in Spain. So I'm going to be a Celto-Mozarabic Catholic bishop. I get myself consecrated, of course. I consecrate 7 or 8 bishops, 3 or 4 priests, and there's an old couple that come to our Mass on Sundays. Usually the number of bishops, priests, and laity are inverse to what they are in the Catholic Church. Not always, but usually. And everything's going along for a while, but then eventually I get into a fight with my bishops. We all split up, and everybody goes off, starts their own churches, consecrate more bishops, and so on. That has been the standard thing from the 19th century into the mid-60s. But in the mid-60s, two interesting things happened, which added other elements to it. One were the post-Vatican II changes in the church, which, the people who revolted against it did so in varying ways and for various reasons. So some of them linked up with some of these people. The other were the changes in Anglicanism. And that, in turn, created a whole bunch of new churches and new groups. So, believe it or not, if you live in a major metropolitan city and you've got the desire, it's not that hard to get validly ordained and consecrated bishop without belonging to anything.
That is my understanding, that there are just a lot of these characters around now, and there isn't exactly a formal process for it either. No controls, shall we say?
No, there's none at all. And how could there be? Because the nature of the thing is self-reproducing. And I've met a number and known a few of people of this sort, and they range from very sincere to very crazy. A few of them are criminal, as is true of anything in life. But they're often not the sort of people, shall we say, who are team players. They're very, very maverick type of folk.
Right. I was curious, what is the is there any sort of sin attached to going to a mass with one of these bishops or one of their priests?
Well, a lot depends on a lot. A lot depends upon the particular bishop and the particular priest and what it is they're saying and what it is they're doing. I'm sorry to say that for certain things, Satanists, require a priest and valid orders, black masses and things of that sort.
Oh yes.
So Charles, real quick, when you're discussing it, I do know, and there's some questions in the chat too, that there are two different groups, right? Two different splinter groups, if you would. There's the old Roman Catholics, and then there's the old Catholics.
Well, that's among them, but the difference, there's so many different groups that call themselves old Roman Catholic, and so many groups that call themselves old Catholic. It can mean anything at all, and they can consecrate and ordain women if they wish to. They can claim to have revived any element of church history that they want to. It's whatever the persons involved want it to be. I mean that's very important to understand. There's no control at all except whatever control they decide to give. So to give you an example, I don't know if you've ever heard of the Liberal Catholic Church.
Yeah, I have.
All right. Well, that was a spin-off from Arnold Harris Matthews' Old Catholic Mission to England. Matthew was kind of an interesting guy, late 19th century, early 20th. He had been a Catholic priest. He was a Dominican, I think. He got turned off because of immorality in the monasteries, so he left the church. He got married, he became an Anglican. Then he went back to the church and became a layman. Then he decided he wanted to be an old Catholic and got consecrated a bishop by the Dutch to be the head of their mission in England. But he was not necessarily the best judge of character. He consecrated as bishops a couple of gentlemen who were members of the Theosophical Society. Now, I don't know if you're familiar with that, but it is basically a sort of westernized Hinduism with reincarnation and so forth.
Yeah, I think I read about it a while ago. It seemed like kind of real, like had a flavor of like the 60s or something to it, if I remember correctly.
Well, I'd say more the 1890s, but sure. Yeah, I mean, it's very, very, very outre. At any rate, suffice to say that they had told Matthew that they were members of the TS, and would this be a problem? And he said at the time, no. But later on, he got into studying theosophy, and he said, no, I don't think that's something a Christian could belong to. You have to choose between me or the TS. So they chose the TS, deposed him, and created the Liberal Catholic Church, which attempts to blend theosophy and Catholicism. Has a very interesting liturgy, a very interesting setup. I mean, some beautiful hymns and all that, and it's been one of the more stable until the last couple of decades. It's one of the more stable groups to emerge out of all of this. But in recent years, it's split over the ordination of women. But at any rate, I mention this because that's just the point. You can create anything you want it to be. As another motif is Celtic Catholicism. There are also, by the way, neo-Catholic groups. That is to say, where you'll find old Catholic groups that talk about retaining pre-Vatican II Catholicism and so on. You'll find others that feel that the church hasn't gone far enough. And so they've got priestesses, they've got all kinds of stuff that, a reader of Commonweal might like. So it's not restricted to any one point of view, any one methodology, anyone anything. The only thing they all have in common is a claim to valid orders. That's it. And interestingly enough, one of the ways that people of this sort will show fellowship with one another is to reconsecrate each other, to pass on their orders, you say. So, for instance, if you had been consecrated in the Matthew succession and I in the Vilat succession, we reconsecrate each other to mix our orders. And that's a way of showing friendship.
Reconsecration seems to be an odd practice to have if your orders are valid and everybody involved recognizes their validity.
Well, you would think so.
I guess.
Don't
ask me to explain.
I don't think anybody can really explain. I mean, when you think about it, I mean, Brother Navarro has a lot of experience with a lot of these different groups and stuff, and I don't even think anybody can really explain down to like the actual physical, like here's the rule, here's the law. Because if we say, are they schismatic? Well, there's no formal declaration of schism against them. So you can't say, no, they're not schismatic, but they are wrong. And here's the reasons they're wrong. So I think we end up in a very sketchy place. It's confusion, right? I mean, all comes down to it. It's confusion. And of course, Archbishop Lefebvre had written a book about that, about Catholics being confused.
The Open Letter to Confuse Catholics, which I have in full on this channel for those who are open to the arguments from Archbishop Lefebvre himself. And I'm working on the follow-up, which is taking a long time.
Yeah, that one's a little bit longer too.
Open Letter to Confuse Catholics isn't a big book to read, but it's almost 5 hours long in audio form. They have uncrowned him is a bit longer, so it's going to take a while.
But I wanted to get to Brother Navarro's position on that, Ant.
Yeah, that's fine. I was about to ask him, actually. Go for it, though. Brother Martin, what is your experience with the... we wanted to have you on because we know you have some experience with some of these groups. So why don't you say first, before you say that, which religious order you're a part of, and, all those things so that people don't... Because Brother Martin is not a member of one of those orders. So
Correct.
Yeah, so
I belong to the Oblates of St. Augustine. We're literally a new foundation started this past summer. And we live down in Florida, which is kind of like a hub for a lot of these independent communities on the western part of Florida in particular, because I know some people know that in Brooksville you have Most Holy Trinity Seminary, which is a hub for Bishop Sanborn and his Sedevacantists. But also over here in Western Florida, there's this community called the Old Roman Catholic See of Cariglo. And it's particularly them that I've befriended. I actually have a friend who became a priest in the Old Roman See of Cariglo, and I've really learned a lot of my history about this particular jurisdiction through him. I mean, he was a seminarian, went entirely through seminary up in Canada in the 1980s and 90s, but because of his modernist bishop or whatever, wasn't ever ordained, so he left. But in particular, I mean, I'm familiar with Arnold Harris Matthews and what went on between him and the Old Catholic Church in 1910 at the Council of Vienna, when they decided to go full-blown modernist, and he decided to break off and do his own thing. A bit of the history of how he came to the United States through the consecration of Rudolf de Londres Berges, who happened to be a German prince during World War I in enemy territory because he lived in England. The British were very I guess, kind to this enemy alien, and rather than arrest him and throw him in a camp, they just decided to exile him. And so he went over to Canada, and that's how kind of the old Roman line came to North America. Like Charles said, I mean, consecrated a few bishops. After that, those few bishops consecrated a few bishops. In particular, I think Charles also mentioned the Polish National Catholics, but in the United States, in the early 20th century, there was a lot of, there was a nationalism, I don't know if it's necessarily racism, but surely nationalism, where, I mean, Irish bishops in the Catholic Church weren't necessarily open to Byzantine Catholics. I know the Orthodox Church of America was founded precisely for that reason. You know, they joke and say that a Roman Catholic bishop founded the Orthodox Church of America precisely because of, he wanted to maintain certain practices here that Romans were, but the Byzantines were not. And so there were different ethnic groups that felt like they were not treated well, and so that's when they started inviting old Roman Catholic or old Catholic priests to be their priests. I actually, in Kansas City, I used to work at a parish that originally, back in the early 1900s, was erected by the Slovenians, like the Slovenians, and invited an old Catholic priest to be their priest because they weren't receiving, welcome, so to speak, from the local bishop, and so they had an old Catholic priest be their priest, and later on that parish reconciled with the diocese. But within 4 blocks of each other, there was the Slovenian National Parish, the Croatian National Parish, the Irish National Parish, and the German National Parish, all within walking distance of each other. So you also had that kind of nationalism going on in the early church with these national parishes, and they still today exist as national parishes.
That reminds me of something in Portland. A friend of mine, in fact, the best man at my wedding, was a Maronite, and he told the story of when the Maronites first showed up in the Archdiocese of Portland. The Archbishop of Portland at the time had no idea that the Maronites were even Catholic. When the Maronites approached him saying, "Hey, would you object to us placing one of our parishes here?" And they were like, "Are you guys even Catholic?" So,
yeah. So I guess go ahead,
that's
Charles.
Quite true. Well, I was going to say that's quite true. And in fact, interesting enough, the 2 gentlemen whom the Prince de Landes Berges consecrated were named brothers in Carfora.
Mm-hmm.
Brothers ended up becoming Russian Orthodox. Carfora consecrated a lot of bishops for different nationalities.
Yep.
Croatian, Slovenian, Polish, and so on. And of course, the great claim to fame of Archbishop Ireland of St. Paul, Minnesota, is that he was instrumental in driving off both the Polish National Catholics and the Ruthenian Orthodox Catholics. So he's very few churchmen you could point to as responsible for 2 schisms. Not.
Wow.
I gotta ask both of you, and I really, we look at this history of these independent bishops, independent priests, independent consecration, all these things that we have going in the past, and now we look at, as we go forward into this era of confusion that we're currently in with the church, with things being said by bishops and cardinals and even the Pope himself, that kind of skirt the edge of being acceptable to Catholic dogma and Catholic doctrine. I mean, recently we have Cardinal Dolan is the head of the Committee of Religious Liberty. Don't we see that this is going to push maybe even more of that, like more of these priests? We have the one priest, and I always forget his name, but he was the Anglican who became a Catholic priest with a family. He stood up and he said, "Hey, look, this is wrong." He was removed from his position, and he's working.
You're thinking of Father Treco.
Yeah, Father Treco.
He of the legendary homily that the Remnant published about a year and a half ago.
Yeah, he's
still on YouTube, isn't it?
Yes, it's on YouTube.
Yeah,
he's working because he's got to support his family. But I mean, as far as I'm concerned, what I'm asking is, as this moves forward, and we see obviously, and we're not going to get into it, a certain group that everybody is against in the church, but do we see that there's going to be more priests who are going to stand up and go, none of this is acceptable as far as the Catholic faith goes, and kind of going down kind of maybe a similar path to this? And I'd like Brother Navarro and Charles to answer that. Charles?
Well, of course. I mean, look, I hate to shed reality on any issue, let alone religion. But the fact remains that the Catholic Church exists for one reason and one reason only. And that reason is the salvation of souls. There's absolutely no other reason for it. Now, the problem is that the leadership have no interest or even knowledge of that kind of thing. And that puts a lot of priests, to say nothing of laymen, and some bishops, in a very invidious position. It's not the first time this has happened, and if we last long enough, I'm sure it won't be the last. But the fact remains that you do, as with the Great Schism, as with the Arian heresy, where all but 5 of the bishops denied that Christ was God, it's a terrible time to be in, especially if you're a priest. Will more be pushed that way? Oh, yeah. And where does the blame lie? Well, in a hierarchical church, where does responsibility always lie? In any hierarchy, where does responsibility lie? Now, mind you, your action in dealing with that hierarchy may not be correct, may even be sinful. But it is in the nature of things that as a lesser individual, you are not the precipitator of the event. I mean, mutatis mutandis, with any schism, either or both sides, and it's very often both sides, have erred. One side may be correct, but undoubtedly it's acted with a lack of charity, if nothing else, and a lack of desire for the salvation of souls. I mean, when you look at some of these excommunications in the church of clerics for various reasons over the past 50, 60, 70 years, sometimes the tone that is so businesslike and so legalistic without any attention to the spiritual aspect of things, it's not a healthy sign. I guess what I'm trying to say is that in the case, for instance, of Father Treco, I think it's quite likely that the sermon he gave was inopportune and possibly imprudent.
To put it mildly.
But when you consider what priests are getting away with, excommunication seems a bit harsh, to say nothing of dissolving the parish. So, will there be more of this? Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. I mean, look, for instance, at the current crisis we're in. I don't want to mention it by name, but there is something of a health crisis out today. And the reaction of a lot of the higher clergy to it has been inane, utterly inane. And when you have a priest who, just to take this as one example, who's really, he thinks that his people need the sacraments. Go figure, people have strange ideas. But he figures they actually need to receive communion and they need to have their sins absolved. And he tries to find some creative way or other to get it to them, and he's punished. What sort of a result do you think that's going to have? I mean, you have to be insane not to see that that's going to cause problems down the line.
This all reminds me, Charles, especially the that patron pre-show you did a couple weeks ago on the Tumblr House website. It brought to mind the novel from somebody you knew pretty well in life, Malachi Martin, which my audience seems to like, or some of them don't, but most of them do. You've read Windswept House, haven't you?
I have.
Okay, I'm not going to ask about that early stuff in the book, but rather there's a character or a family in there called the Gladstones, and they, in that novel, end up becoming sort of the patrons of a bunch of independent priests. And from what I understand, that's actually a real depiction, or fairly accurate. Do you know how widespread the independent priest part of this equation is? Priests without a real bishop, or that they're sort of the wandering gunslinger, sacramentally speaking, keeping things going. And if there's any truth to his portrayal of that in that novel.
Well, I don't actually, and for myself, I tend to stay away from that sort of thing. Not because I've got an inherent dislike of people who aren't hand in glove with their bishop, but simply because the problem you always have in such an arrangement is that fallen nature will tend to act on you. And by that I mean to say, we are supposed to have bishops. We're supposed to be in a hierarchy.
Absolutely.
And without them, I mean, obeying them will mess you up in one way. Cutting yourself off from them will mess you up in another way.
there is when you talk about when you talk about the idea of hierarchical relationships, whether it's in the theological form or if it's in the secular form, there is a line, right?
Of course there's a line, but the problem is you come here to prudential judgments.
Right.
I've told you that I myself wouldn't care to have a great deal to do with that, and it's true.
Right. Like, for instance, for me, if I was, dying on the side of the road, from a car accident, and a gentleman came up to me and said, "I am an independent Catholic priest, validly ordained. Would you like would you like the end of life sacraments?" Like, yes, please.
Of course, that isn't even an issue. I'd grab an Orthodox if that's all there was. I don't care.
Exactly.
I mean, at the end of the day, all of these sorts of things, and to the degree, brother, that you count as a cleric, then to that degree, forgive what I'm about to say. But at the end of the day, I don't really care too much about the clergy's problems. I really care about going to heaven, and that means I need the sacraments. So, you know what? Push comes to shove, I really don't care.
You just made the best statement I have heard that I have tried to say to people, that the issue with the clergy is a clerical issue, and us as the laity, while we should have some background in it, it's really not our place to get involved in the clergy's issues. It's the clergy's job to fix those issues, not ours.
No, it's not us at all. What I was going to say was that while I myself would not go that route, I certainly can't condemn those who do. My position is such that I don't have a lot of the problems that other people have. But if I were living in some place in the middle of Kansas, there's one regular parish for miles around, and the priest is nuts. What am I supposed to do? See, I've lived my whole life in big cities. I've always had tons of alternatives. It's not a problem for me. But by that token, I'm not in a position to presume to judge those who don't have my freedom of choice. If that makes sense to you.
Yeah. Yes. That does.
And I'm Last time I checked, I'm not employed by the CDF. I don't think I'm licensed as an inquisitor. I don't think so.
You mean you're not? You mean you're not a canon lawyer, Thomist, clerical expert, church historian? I mean, all the other things that everybody is these days.
No, church historian I could cop to because I wrote a history of the popes. But the rest of it,
Mr. Coloumbe, you are a church
historian. You are a historian.
Yeah.
That book sits on my desk, by the way, Vicars of Christ. I tell everybody whenever I do my book shows on my channel, I always bring up that book and I say, if you think we have like a bad pope now, go and read this book because it's not the first time.
No, and as I say, if we have enough time ahead of us, I'm sure we'll have worse to come.
Oh yes.
I mean, there'll be a period sooner or later. Again, presuming that these are not the last days. This sooner or later, somehow or other, this nonsense will be sorted out, and then there'll be a period of growth and so on, and then we'll have some other nonsense. I mean, one of the things that struck me when writing the book was how much the history of the church is out of the frying pan into the fire. On and on and on, over and over and over again. But as I say, it really behooves us, I think, to be as charitable as possible to those who pursue courses which we ourselves would not, or with which we even disagree, so long as there's no denial of the defined dogmas of the faith involved.
Right. This is why one of my, I have to police my comments section because there are people who try to post links to, internet indecency in my comments. There are people who Protestants who come in to try to lead people out of the church, and I have zero tolerance for that. But, people say, why do you engage with sedevacantists in your chat? I'm like, as long as they're not trying to recruit people, I don't care. I don't know what led to the decision they made to adopt that. And there are many cases where I would rather stand shoulder to shoulder with a sedevacantist in this current environment in the church than with the Pastor Jimmys of the world.
Well, and honestly, I mean, I understand sedevacantism. For me, it's kind of wishful thinking, in the sense that it would make everything so much easier.
I definitely agree. That's actually one of the reasons why I don't think this is one of the reasons that led me to not adopting it. It's simply because it seems like just an easy escape hatch.
And you have so many different paths, though, right? Right. I mean, that's part of the show is that you have sedevacantist, you have benevacantist, you have old Catholic, old Roman Catholic, you got Orthodox. I mean, how many people do we see who flee from the Catholic Church at the first sign of any issue, and they run to Eastern Orthodox? Like, it's so much better on that side of the river.
The apostolic lineage that were literally taken over by the KGB. I mean, yeah. But Brother Martin, I don't want to leave you out of this conversation too much. Part of the reason I wanted to do this and have you on is because you actually have some experience with the old Roman Catholics, don't you? Or is it the old Catholics?
Sure. I mean, I live old Romans. No old Catholics.
Even I get confused about this. The reason that I bring it up is because this had gotten to causing some rather silly internet drama at a time when there was literally no room for that kind of thing. And it dominated, I saw this on multiple platforms after a while online. And so I guess there's a question of, because they're not in union with the Holy Father, are we not to accept charity from these groups? If you want to explain your situation, if you feel comfortable doing that, or at least give some insight into it, because right now the whole topic strikes me as just kind of funny in a way.
Sure. So if I could just say one thing, kind of tail ending what Charles said earlier about in the situation regarding the worldwide circumstance of disease or whatever you want to call it. I know some old Roman Catholic priests that went to the hospitals here in Western Florida, and the nurses there were very thankful because the local diocese, refused to send priests to administer the sacraments to the dying in the hospitals. Down in lockdown. Like the old Romans, they never closed down. They offer strictly the traditional sacraments, according to the traditional rites, and they were always there, offering the sacraments for their faithful. It actually got to the point to my friend, who's a priest for the old Romans, told him that he had gained a couple parishioners precisely because their Catholic priest told them, if you receive the sacraments from the old Roman Catholics, don't bother coming back to the parish. Like the Catholic priest literally straight up told that to his parishioners. If you receive sacraments from these old Roman Catholic priests, don't come back. And so they didn't go back. So that's also the kind of situation going on. Is there's they're refusing to administer the sacraments, and they're refusing to let you receive them validly from other priests. But in regards to my situation, the old community that I was with was told by the bishop that it was not viable, precisely because I and another member liked the traditional Latin Mass, and he didn't want a traditional Latin Mass community in his diocese, and he was afraid that I would attract traditional vocations to this community. And I was literally months away from taking final vows and was not allowed to by the bishop, saying that it was going to be either suppressed or not allowed to receive new members. So basically killed. And so I left. But the 5 years I was there, I supported myself from my savings, which I didn't necessarily have to do, but the community asked me if I could do it to do it. I mean, it was their responsibility. I had vows to provide for me, but I did put $100,000 in, $20,000 a year to support myself. When the community was killed, I tried to talk with the bishop, and he said that I would land on my feet, that he would make sure I had a place to go. I asked him, I really need this money to be reimbursed so I could look for another place in another religious community, all that kind of stuff. And that needs money. If I were to get a job, I'm at the mercy of my job for vacation time, all that kind of stuff, to visit communities. But I've already, I've been in religious life 8 years now, and this is my vocation, and I don't want to be a fish out of water for too long. So I asked that. We left the conversation. He was very, positive, all that kind of stuff. He passed on the responsibility, delegated the responsibility to the moderator of the community, which was the chancellor of his diocese. 2 days before my vows expired, I had not heard anything about any remuneration whatsoever. I emailed him, was completely ignored. In the mail on June 1st, when my vows expired, I had received a letter from the chancellor, moderator of the community, saying to turn in my habit. So I did. I waited around 2 weeks to see if I would get nothing. I ended up leaving the community without a penny in my pocket. After giving my entire life savings to this community and to this diocese for the last 5 years. And so I had my friend who was an old Roman Catholic priest down here in Florida, and he said, we have a completely empty building down here. We don't know what to do with it. Some of us are considering selling it. Others want to keep it, of course, but a completely empty building. Why don't you come here? I'll talk to the bishop. Why don't you come here, live here, rent-free, utilities-free for a year if you need it? I was like, bet. This sounds like a deal. I have nothing. The church gave me nothing. Kicked me out, gave me not a single penny. This works for me. And so because I didn't have the finances to go anywhere else, well, I figured I'll start my own community with, I'm very settled in with the Augustinian vocation. Let me give it a go. And so I just started a nonprofit organization so that I could be able to ask people to give me money, in the sense that, benefactors. That way I could write them a tax receipt, because it's very hard to ask people for money when you can't, large sums of money when you can't give them even a tax credit for it. So that was the first thing I did. I used the only address that I had. And you can Google it. That address belongs to the old Roman Catholic See of Kerglo. And that's what kind of kicked up that storm, was that, I can't even receive the charity, having been put in the circumstances I was by the church itself, by a bishop himself. I can't even accept the charity of these supposedly schismatics, to simply to start a new life. So that was that.
Right, and that was kind of my point in bringing all this up, is because a lot of times these things aren't so cut and dry. It's strange that our, what could more honestly be called our separated brethren. I've never been comfortable with that term being applied to Protestants. Not anything on a personal level against them, but when there are groups who have apostolic lineage and valid orders but are not in union with Rome, that are much more Catholic in the way they live and the way they, I guess, act in the social order, right? Like, you are receiving help because you need it from a group of people who saw you need it and knew that it was their Christian duty to offer it if they were able.
Absolutely.
And your own, the successor of the apostle that you ostensibly answer to did not. And that's really troubling. And this is why I wanted, because you have, again, firsthand experience with these these independent, I guess you could say, or schismatic groups. Because technically, that's really what we're talking about here. When we're talking about an independent bishop, we're not talking about the Society of St. Pius X, or even, I would go so far as to say, the SSPV, because people are in the chat are asking, well, what does Charles and Brother Martin think of the Society of St. Pius V? And we can get to that in a second here. We're talking about people who have, completely separated themselves from Rome. No talk of eternal Rome, not keeping the Pope in their masses, not praying for a new Pope. They are their own unique, separate organization. And this is why I don't like cut and dry solutions to these kinds of problems about the state of the church, is because they are things. I always have been attracted to Sister Lucia's phrasing of her term, the diabolic disorientation.
I did want to ask, while we're on this topic, because Charles is I would say probably one of the most learned guys on the history, is that when we throw around the term schismatic a lot, right? We point to everybody when we say schism, right? But in my understanding, and I'm a philosopher and an architect, so I'm not a historian, but my understanding is that we haven't had an official declaration of schism since the Eastern Orthodox. Is that correct?
Well, no, we have had the old Catholics come to mind, the German, the continental old Catholics, as they say, and the Polish nationals. But there are a couple of things here that need, as it were, unpacking. Firstly, brother, I have to say that as far as your story goes, I don't know about schism, but I do know about a con job. You've been had.
Yeah, tell me about it.
I mean, it's real cut and dried. You see, you were sold the Brooklyn Bridge. And I would urge you, frankly, if there's any kind of legal redress, I would urge you to use it, not for your sake, but for theirs. Because you see, con men don't stop until they get bitten. You see,
absolutely.
So when you put the kibosh on a con artist, it's really not so much for you necessarily as for him and as for the other marks he might be looking after.
Yep, that's for sure.
And this sounds like a total con to me, number one. This is the kind of thing that really makes my blood boil. Putting in that kind of money and getting bupkis, if you want that kind of custom, I know people downtown LA will take care of you. But the fact that somebody wears a pointed hat and does it, and I don't mean a Klansman. Anyway, sorry, I had to get that off my chest.
No, I agree with that.
But secondly, the Eastern schism is a weird thing, juridically speaking. And I say that because, number one, it really dates to the degree that it exists, and again, I'm speaking juridically, from 1462, not 1054, when the then Patriarch of Constantinople, appointed by the Sultan for that very purpose, to break the union with Rome, broke the union with Rome. Now, mind you, I have a hard time accepting the validity of any action of that sort by a patriarch appointed by a sultan, the Turkarchia, as it was called. But secondly, in 1964, both the Patriarch Athenagoras II of Constantinople and our own Paul VI lifted the mutual excommunications of 1054, which were the only juridical basis of the schism to begin with. There was never an actual excommunication of the East by Rome, just of the Patriarch of Constantinople. Now, with where that leaves us in reality, that's a whole other story. But juridically, I don't see that there's any basis for it. Now, mind you, it's a whole different kettle of wax on their side, but I'm just saying from our side. Secondly, another point that needs to be made regarding the charity extended, brother, by these folk. Canon 833 allows Catholic faithful to receive the sacraments and other services from any clergy with valid orders if there's a necessity for it.
Right.
And it leaves the question of necessity up to the individual. Now, if that's true of the sacraments, how much more true would it be of an act of charity? And by the way, the priest who went to the sick people and said, if you've received from them, don't come back. In line with the canon I've mentioned, the man was guilty of those two wonderful Latin words that I would love to have tattooed on every cleric of that sort. Ultra vires, beyond his power.
Yeah.
The pastor was not in position to make that kind of a pronouncement. Now, mind you, I wouldn't make it a habit of going to such people. But if I'm sick in the hospital and I've got no other, as I say, I take it from the Orthodox.
Exactly.
I need the sacraments. I don't need a dog in the manger cleric. You know what I mean by dog in the manger, don't you? I have to ask you. People today don't know Aesop's fables.
Yeah, I don't know that one.
All right, basically, this is a very important story. It's one of Aesop's fables. There was a dog, and he saw the cows chewing the straw in the manger. So he figured, well, I'll get some of that stuff for myself. So he jumps in the manger, drives the cows away, jumps in the manger, takes a bite of the straw and spits it out, realizes he doesn't like straw and he's not going to eat it. Well, the cows come back and they'd like to eat the straw. But he says, no, you're not. I'm here. Get away. And he barks at them and drives them off. So a dog in the manger is someone who can or won't use something himself, but won't let anyone else do it either. You see what I mean?
Yeah.
So if you won't give the sacraments to your faithful, but there are people who under canon law they can receive the sacraments from who are willing to do so, it's bad enough you won't give it to them. The best you can do is keep your mouth shut.
That's one of the hardest things to do in the world today.
Oh, I know. As they say, everyone has a right to my opinion.
I had a question. It came from the chat. So somebody had mentioned that the society you mentioned, the Theophysicical Society that you mentioned, is actually the group that runs that monastery icons. Do you know anything about that? That's the one that has those icons that are blasphemous or whatever.
They incorporate non-Catholic, quote unquote, sacred imagery with Catholic imagery, as I recall in the chat.
I don't know anything about it. I do know I went into a store some years ago and I saw an icon of Harvey Milk. That kind of turned me off. There are a lot of weird icons out there. That's all I can tell you, but I don't know anything about this group.
For those of you who don't know, who are too young, I'm older. Harvey Milk was a mayor of San Francisco
and a James Martin bridge building activist, we'll say.
Yes.
Oh boy.
Yeah, he was. Sean Penn, I think, portrayed him in a movie.
I stopped going out of my way to watch. I was very briefly into trying to watch Academy Award nominated films, and when that one got nominated, I was like, I think I'm gonna pass, and haven't really made any effort since then.
So I did want to go into there. So there are all these groups, right, Charles, right, brother? You got all these groups, and we've discussed. We kind of discussed a few. One of the ones that I kind of always had an issue with, because I knew him personally. I knew Father Sadaka personally. I had met him on a few occasions in Ohio at the time, and I was always conflicted because Father Sadaka came off as a good man, a good priest, but here he is. He's with the CMRI, and so for me, I'm like, okay, well, I can't agree with that position, even though I think you're a good priest, you're a good man, and as you said, I would definitely, if I was dying on the side of the road, I would definitely take last rites from him. But I often wonder how do we get to this place where Father Sadaka feels the need to create the CMRI? I mean, we talk about these things being here, but I guess really the question I think a lot of people would ask is, how do we get there? Is it just that these people are narcissistic, that they're self-absorbed, that all these things, or is it that there's a bigger underlying issue that we're not seeing?
Well, obviously, how do I put it? Obviously, there's a huge problem. It doesn't mean that everyone who sees the problem is correct, but it doesn't mean they're entirely wrong either. So to give you an example, I mentioned earlier that there were 5 bishops who, and only 5, who insisted that Christ was God at the time of the Arian heresy. Now, one of these 5 was a gentleman called Lucifer of Cagliari. When the Arian crisis passed, the heresy, of course, lasted for some time, but when the crisis passed, and most of the semi-Arian creeds were done away with, and so on and so forth, Lucifer of Cagliari held that no one who had ever had communion with an Arian bishop could be reconciled to the church. It was impossible. Well, here was a man who had suffered a great deal for the faith during the Arian heresy, but in the aftermath got a little crazy. And it's easy to understand why he would, because he'd been put through a lot, and the people he knew had been put through a lot. A similar occurrence happened after the persecution of Diocletian and the subsequent legalization of Catholicism by Constantine, where a number of people had apostatized during the persecution, the lapses so-called, and they wanted to come back to the church. And an African bishop named Donatus said, no, they can never be reconciled. Anyone who abandoned the church during the persecution is outside the church forever and can never be reconciled. Well, as you can imagine, that got him into trouble with the Pope of the day. And the next thing you knew, he had his own group called the Donatists, who were very aggressive, shall we say, and they're attacking the Catholics. But I mention this because there's no doubt that both the Arian heresy and the lapsing under the Diocletian persecution occurred. And there's no doubt they were terrible things. But both Lucifer of Cagliari and Donatus' responses to them, although they were brave men to resist them during their time, the aftermath, they went a bit wild. They went astray. So it's quite possible for people to be aware of a terrible problem that a lot of people are not aware of and come up with the wrong solution. It doesn't necessarily mean they're evil or awful, just means they're wrong. I never knew Father. I read a good deal of what he wrote. I had a couple of exchanges with him. I never met him, never talked to him. He certainly seemed like a very erudite individual, without a doubt. But at the end of the day, I don't agree with his conclusions.
Oh yeah, I agree with you there. I mean, I like I said, for me it was hard because it's like when you meet some of these people and you really get to talk to them, and you say, okay, you seem good, you seem great, but at the same point, here's my problem: is I can't agree with how you got to where you are. It's like, it's not as simple as, hey, you took the freeway and I took the surface roads. It's completely different.
It's a tough thing, but he certainly understood the gravity of the problem. I mean, I'll give you another example. There was a priest out on Long Island, New York, called Father Gomar de Paul. And back, I think, in '65, he founded what was called the Catholic Traditionalist Movement, the CTM, out in, I think, Westbury, Long Island, somewhere like that. And he refused to say the new Mass. He said only the Trinitarian Mass. He soon gathered a group of people around him. And Father de Paul was a very, very intelligent, very erudite man. But he was very single-minded, shall we say, in his vision of things. And his people really came to feel there wasn't much salvation outside Father de Paul's chapel. Now he's dead, and his remaining devotees gather on Sunday to watch old films of him offering mass.
Yeah, that's a bit weird.
You should be worried when you're the group you're with forms a sort of cult of personality around the founder, not holding the founder up as a potential saint, but extra ecclesiam Father Paul or whatever. Well, that becomes a problem.
Well, so we have a more recent one, and you and I both know that this particular individual, Brother Andre Marie, where their order was recently, shall I say, suppressed by the bishop in New Hampshire. For what reason, nobody really knows, right?
Well, that's the thing. Let's put it this way: given the track record of the people responsible for the suppression, I could hazard a guess, but I don't care to.
Were they literally suppressed, or were they just
not officially?
No,
they're not permitted to have mass on their site, and there's more to it than that. But
there's more to it, and the worst of it. All I can tell you is this: when diocesan authorities, and this isn't just Manchester. I'm thinking also of Brother Martin's conman bishop. When they play fast and loose with canon law, when they tell you, "Oh well, that's just canon law standpoint," well, forget about canon law. Just as I tell you, that's how you know the fix is in. If they won't abide by the law, then they're not honest. I don't know how else to put it.
That one kind of surprised me, though, Charles, because I actually, I'm probably a little dox here, but I grew up under who is now Bishop Labacci. He was Father Labacci in my local small town New York church. And I say small town, it was in Queens, but it was a very small portion of Queens. And when he was priest, in the beginning, he was very much toward a very traditional bent. But as he became the pastor of our church, he went right into lockstep, I would almost say, with the modernist thing. He brought in a lot of this stuff that we had never had in our church. Our church was always Adorantium. It was always very traditional, but he brought in Eucharistic ministers. He brought in the folk music. He brought in all this stuff when he became pastor. So I often wonder if there isn't some pressure put on the priests in some degree to either obey even what they know is wrong or be cast aside in a way. So I was kind of surprised when Bishop Labacci was the one that actually made that statement.
Well, without wanting to go into any details about that particular episode, let me just say that he is far from the only power in that diocese.
I'll interject here and say that Brother Andre Marie has spoken on the Crusade channel and about this issue, and you might be able to find his words straight from the most well-known member of that group. Possibly on the Sensus Fidelium channel or on possibly on the Crusade channel. You can find what he has said, and he can speak much. He's much more comfortable giving a lot of details about his own group than I suspect any of us are.
Also on his website, Catholicism.org.
Yeah,
I would agree that's the best place to look at it. But again, setting aside the immediate with them, it's the whole pattern of playing fast and loose. Well, I mean, to give you one example, we're not going to mention the dreaded SSPX, but the fact is that when Lefebvre attempted to appeal his suspension to the Signatura, the Secretary of State, Cardinal Villot, forbade the Signatura to hear the case. Well, you can't do that. Well, I mean, you can. They did it, didn't they? But then Al Capone could do what he liked. The point I'm making is if they play fast and loose with the law, it means they're not honest and they can't be trusted. This isn't rocket science, to be honest with you. It's, if they're dishonest with the thing, if they play fast and loose, then they have a reason to. And when you find out what that reason is, you probably won't like it.
So if we talk about the problems, right? So we know the problems. We know all these things. We know all these things are going on. We know that there's almost a concerted effort against, shall we say, traditionalism, right? We can encompass all these groups: SSPV, SSPX. I personally, everybody here knows I am an SSPX attender. I'm a member of the Third Order. So I'm just saying traditionalists as a whole, even the FSSP, the Institute of Christ the King, all traditionalists are under, let's just say, scrutiny, maybe not fire, but there's definitely a lot of scrutiny towards them. How do we progress? In other words, how do we get past this, Charles and brother, and continue to have a devotion to the traditions of the church, as opposed to the new presentation of the church, if you would?
You want to hit that first, brother?
Can you phrase the question a little bit differently? I'm trying to wrap my head around what it is exactly you're asking.
Okay. We know now that we have these issues. We know now that we have all the people out there that are going out and becoming independent priests, independent bishops. Right. We have traditional orders, SSPX, SSPV, FSSP, and so on and so forth. We have all these orders. We know that there's scrutiny from Rome for these groups. We know that there's scrutiny by the Novus Ordo attendees and clergy of these groups. How do we progress so that we're not looking at this state of independent priests and independent bishops and independent churches? How do we progress and continue the traditions of the church in a way which, as we know, can sometimes become toxic? There are toxic people in every kind of group, but how do we keep the traditions of the church?
Well, I'll be honest. The first time I actually met a group of the old Roman Catholics here of Clare Glow, it was pretty interesting because, I mean, especially when I met their laity, there's like, it was almost as if I was walking into a parish that, like, Vatican II never happened. Like, they just kept going. They had the traditional mass. The priests are very traditional. They do, wear everything that's traditional, speak, act like priests. And it was almost like you were stepping into not necessarily going back in time, because people had cell phones in their pockets or whatever. But they just didn't let all of the scrutiny get to them. They know the mass is valid. They know this is the traditional Latin mass, the Tridentine mass that it's always been, and they just stopped really caring. I know the old Romans in particular. They don't. I've heard some sedevacantist priests will not give you communion if they see you at the communion rail and they don't know who you are. Like, the old Romans aren't necessarily that scrutinous. They'll find out who you are kind of afterwards. But there's no new baptism that you need in order to enter their traditionalist movement or anything. They see themselves pure and simple as Catholics. They pray for the Pope in the canon. They have a picture of Pope Francis up at the back of the church, all that kind of stuff. So I guess for us in particular, it's it's kind of, in a sense, letting go. If we live our faith, people are always going to hate us. People will always find a reason to attack us. And of course, whenever some 20-something-year-old finds out or hears the word schism for the first time, it's like he has to go and apply it to everybody he wants because he finds the word to be fun or something. I don't know. But it's just, it's living our faith, regardless of how people see it.
And, well, I would add something that has to be remembered, and it's easy to forget, but we can't. And that is that at the end of the day, as in every other period in history, God really is in charge.
Yeah.
Now, I wrote a book a few years ago called A Catholic Quest for the Holy Grail. And in the course of it, I had to do a great deal of research on Eucharistic miracles, specifically the 6 that have occurred in the past 25 years. And by Eucharistic miracle, I mean the usual stuff from the Middle Ages, bread turning to flesh, wine to blood, etc., bleeding hosts, that kind of thing. And these 6 were the ones that have been subjected to scientific analysis and are frankly utterly baffling. Because, as you may or may not be aware, bread doesn't usually turn to flesh. As a rule, wine doesn't really turn to blood. Not usually. And the blood in this case, always the same blood type, the same as on the shroud, or is the blood with enzymes in it that you associate with someone who's being tortured. All that kind of stuff, very peculiar and weird. Now, I mention this for several reasons. One, each of the masses that these things occurred at were Novus Ordo masses, on the one hand. And on the other hand, they were in very, that's the word I want, devout, but sort of out of the way parishes. Now, I mention this because it is quite possible to live one's faith and ignore the hierarchy. It is quite possible to receive the sacraments without constantly worrying about what the Pope and the bishops are up to. Now, I don't recommend that we do that we simply pretend nothing's happening and everything's great. It's not what I mean. What I do mean is that we have to focus on what's real. You know, I was born 60 years ago. I was born the day John F. Kennedy was elected. And that looked like the apogee of American Catholicism. And liturgically, by the way, we were under the 1960 calendar, not the 62 for you purists out there. We had just gotten one of our own at the White House. Isn't that great? During the course of my life, it's been total, constant, regular, complete decline. And yet, the reality hasn't changed. The truths haven't changed. The same things that would take you to heaven or send you to hell in 1960 will do the same in 2020. Now, there's no priest, no bishop, no pope who can change that. So to answer your question, we have to focus, I think, on what we ourselves can affect, on who we can affect. You know, you can't evangelize India, but you can look at your friends and neighbors and relatives. You can't make the popes and bishops wonderful people, but you can encourage the good priests that come across your way as best you can, because they certainly need it. And if you're in a particular place, I don't know, like you've got sort of an actionable problem with a bishop. I don't want to push at you, Bishop, Brother Martin, but boy, oh boy. I'll tell you what, if I were in your shoes, I'd be lawyering up. But I mean, that is the kind of thing that you should not let go. And if for whatever reason you find yourself in that kind of a position with these people, they need a slap on the hand. Again, not for your sake, but for theirs, for the sake of the church. And that's something you see you can do. You can't make the Holy See wonderful, but if Bishop Nubnik has put himself in a position to where you can really teach him a lesson, teach it.
Yeah, absolutely.
But usually, usually very, very few of us ever get that kind of opportunity. So for the most part, it's what it's always been. The corporal works of mercy and the spiritual works of mercy. Saving souls in our own sphere. Because you do that, you may very
I agree with what you just said there 100%. I mean, I'm a normal person, right? We're all sinners to some degree, right? We're not perfect beings. But I try my hardest. We help out with a family whose mother had left them there, and they're Mormon. and they come over and they say the rosary with us. So it's kind of like my little bit of, the kids come over here and there with my kids and saying the rosary, and they're Mormon. It's like, okay, maybe this is just a little bit of me helping somehow.
Yeah. Well, and you don't know what fruit it'll bear. One of my favorite segments of the Catholic Digest, which is not necessarily the most exciting Catholic journal you'll read, but my favorite part of it is called The Open Door, because it's convert stories. And they'll range all the way from, yes, when I was 12 years old, I went into a Catholic church, and I knew that was God on the altar. So as soon as I came of age, I converted. All the way from that to, well, when I was a boy, I used to play with these Catholic kids. We'd go to Mass sometimes. When I was in high school, I dated this Catholic girl, and I was at her confirmation. And then there was this really neat Catholic pastor and Catholic chaplain at college. And it goes on and on and on. And that's why I converted at 73. Now, obviously, most people are in between those two extremes.
And I love this stream because this is the first time I've been on a stream where I'm not the oldest guy on the stream. So,
oh wow, well, I'm available for small groups and private parties.
but speaking of that, talking about conversions and everything. One of the ones I loved reading about, and I don't know if you've ever heard of the story of how John Wayne converted to Catholicism.
Oh yeah,
that is the best story, and I believe it's his grandson, right? His grandson's a priest.
His grandson's a priest, and of course, all his children were Catholic because he had several wives, but he always married Catholics.
When he converted, though, do you know? Did he disavow all the that special stone cutting group that he belonged to?
I don't know. I wasn't present. I'm sure he must have. I mean, he was compos mentis when he converted, and by the time he died, he knew what was what. And one of my favorite Hollywood convert stories, though, is Vincent Price.
I did not know that.
Well, it's a very funny story.
Wait. One of the most iconic and frankly coolest actors of that era is a convert. I just want to make sure I got that right.
You got that right. Vincent Price. Well, he was married 3 times. And his third wife was a Catholic. She was an Australian actress. And she was kind of renowned for being, this is a weird paradox, for being very devout and somewhat foul-mouthed. So the story goes, she'd just come out of the Brompton Oratory, having gotten a confession in London. And a friend of hers saw her, and immediately starts in with some gossip. And she says, "Don't tell me that garbage. Can't you see I'm in an effing state of grace?" Which, I mean, I don't know what to say to that. But anyway, that's the kind of lady she was. So Vincent Price marries her. And everything's going on very well, but he starts sneaking out on Wednesday nights. And he comes up with various stupid excuses, but she starts getting very suspicious. And finally, she buttonholes him and says, "Look, you tell me what you're doing on Wednesday nights, and you tell me the truth, or I'm out of here." And he knew his wife well enough to know that she wasn't kidding. If she says, she would pack her bag and leave. There was no issue about that. So he had to confess what he had been doing. Every Wednesday night, he was going to St. Victor's Church in West Hollywood and taking instruction to come into the faith. But he wanted to surprise her. So she felt bad for ruining the surprise. But that's he was received by Monsignor Parnassus in St. Victor's. So that was the story of Vincent Price. But now you know.
Wow, that's cool. I mean, he's definitely up there. I mean, as far as Hollywood types that I still like look at and go, that guy could act. I think the last one was Christopher. Go ahead.
Christopher Lee?
Yeah.
Well, he was Anglo-Catholic. Very, very private man about his life. One thing that really annoyed him was when people would accuse him of being an occultist. that drove him utterly mad. And he made several interviews where he warned people both against that sort of thing and complained about people, saying it about him. But he had been in the British version of the special ops during World War II, Christopher Lee, I mean. And there's a very funny story about how when they were filming Lord of the Rings, Peter Jackson says to him, because at one point, I don't think they used the shot in the end, but at one point, Saruman goes up and slits Grima Wormtongue's throat. So Peter Jackson says to Christopher Lee, now imagine what the sound would be like if you came up behind a man and drew a knife across his throat. And Christopher Lee looked at him and said, I don't have to imagine, I know.
I read that one. That one made me laugh.
Yeah, it makes me laugh thinking about it. Poor Peter Jackson, not what he was expecting.
Christopher Lee had a very, we'll say, wide-ranging career. Towards the end, he actually put out a couple of heavy metal albums too, and I think one of them was a Christmas album.
Yes,
he did the Christmas album, but he also did the album that was all about Charlemagne.
Yeah.
Yeah, and he I remember he was giving out the last decade or so of his life. Every year he'd do a Christmas video for his fans. Just a short message wishing everybody a happy Christmas and that kind of stuff. But on one occasion, he was wearing this sort of odd-looking African-style hat, and he's talking, doing his usual thing. And then he says, some people have asked me about the hat. And he said, believe me, if you see it, you'll understand why they asked. It was a gift to me from my late dear friend, Vincent Price.
Those guys were great. I can't even look at like acting today and go that there are any guys like that left in Hollywood. I'm a devotee of Sinatra and Dean Martin. Of course, we know Sinatra was the greatest Catholic.
I'll actually give a little plug for the Rights and Duties channel here. You had a fairly recent convert who was an actor who, after he converted, he sort of left that all behind, and he tells his story and talks about the, we'll just say the rather grimy state of Hollywood on your. You did that 2 days ago? That on your channel?
Yes. Yesterday, actually, that was, I don't know if Sir Charles has heard of Bug Hall. He played Alfalfa in the remake of The Little Rascals. He was on with me yesterday.
I know Bug quite well. He and I used to go to Mass together.
Awesome. Bug is a friend of mine, Anthony's, and Brother Navarro's. He's a really great guy.
Yeah, he is. He really is. And you see, one of the penalties you pay for being a Catholic in Hollywood is that you'll meet every other Catholic in Hollywood.
I can't even imagine going into the church in like LA and you sitting down in church and because you do know the names, right? You know Mark Wahlberg is a Catholic. Mel Gibson is, well, he's Catholic, but we don't know what state Catholic he is anymore. But Kevin James and Bug, and you go into all these names and you're like, there's actually more Catholics in Hollywood than people think. Like a lot of people didn't know Schwarzenegger is Catholic, so there's that.
Yeah, sometimes you wonder if he knows, but no, it is true. And mind you, we've come a long way from the original topic, but that's okay. I've often pointed out that one of the interesting things about the history of American entertainment is that for what was traditionally and historically a primarily WASP country, its entertainment industry was primarily conducted by Catholics, Jews, and blacks. The more marginalized elements of the society, which I think is quite interesting.
Yeah, I almost wonder if it's a characteristic of the entertainment industry anywhere in history you go, that it's usually the outsider groups who are the dominant forces in it. I'm not versed enough to know for sure, but...
Well, I mean, There are several different things at play here. I mean, acting traditionally was not a respectable profession. And I say this as the fourth generation in a family of actors on my dad's side. It was not a respectable profession. So, for instance, if you know New York City at all, there's an Episcopal church there called the Church of the Transfiguration, but its nickname is the Little Church Around the Corner.
Yep. I know that one.
Yeah, but it got that name because Joseph Jefferson was a very famous actor in the day, the 19th century. He was an actor, and an Episcopalian friend of his, another actor, died. And so he went to go see the rector of the Church of the Holy Communion, I guess it was, and asked him about setting up a funeral for his friend. He said, "Oh no, we certainly wouldn't have an actor buried from this church. Why don't you try the Little Church Around the Corner?" And that's how it got the name. And similarly, St. Malachi's in New York, the Catholic Actors Chapel, it was the same thing. That's what's that?
Oh, you just dropped off very briefly is all. No worries.
Oh, I'm sorry. No, St. Malachi's, the Catholic Church. Would you pardon me for just a minute, please?
So I did while Sir Charles is taking a little break there for a second. I did want to bring up that, going back to the original topic, I know our shows kind of start with a topic and then we branch off into other things, which I think is good to a degree, right? It's good to start with a base, have a discussion on a topic.
Yes, sorry about that.
Expand that topic, because I believe that Catholicism as a whole is and I want to say this, and I really want both Brother and Charles to kind of chime in on this, because one of the books that I love of yours is Puritan's Empire, right? One of my favorite, and right now sitting on my desk is actually Star Spangled Crown, because I'm working on an article on Americanism. But in your book, you approach the subject of kind of about Catholic identity a little bit, and I think that that's one of the things when we talk about this with all of these different things, is that the Catholic identity is kind of in America. I would say it's almost becoming extinct.
That's a fair, truly a fair proposition. The sad truth of the matter is that it's almost come to be meaningless. And when people would talk about the Catholic vote and things like that, that doesn't exist anymore. So yes, I'd say Catholic identity is definitely shrinking, to say the least. And oddly enough, the current, for want of a better word, health crisis has, I think, escalated it. There's really no need for the sacraments. I think a lot of people will believe it and won't return.
I think you're correct on that. It's one of those, I'm afraid you're correct kind of situations. Mm-hmm. The bishops have already started noticing this too. That's why some parishes are doing their very strange outreach of inviting your friends back to Mass. It reminds me of my old parish in downtown Portland, where I came into the church years ago. We were told to invite a friend to Mass who had never been to Mass before. In the spirit of actually spreading the gospel. But now this is the invite your Catholic friend or relative to come back because we didn't we didn't try to keep the sacraments available to people.
Well, I think it goes.
There's nothing sadder than looking at the website of a parish and seeing all sacraments and services suspended. Please donate at.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, it goes to that point, though. I mean, I think it was LifeSite put up an article yesterday where they discussed how 50% of American Catholics agree with disordered unions, if you would, because we can't use the other term. But when you lose the identity, so the sacraments, as you perfectly pointed out, when you take that away, you start to lose the idea. You also stop believing in the dogma, right?
Yes. Of course, because and the two go hand in hand. I mean, you do have a chicken and egg thing. If you lose the dogma, you lose the identity. You lose the identity, you lose the dogma. It's the way it is. And the thing that I find almost, I don't know what word to use, frustrating, I don't know, insane, is that the bishops would not have seen this. You know, they were so in love with their own vision, whatever that might be, that they never bothered to look at what its actual effect would be. Mutatis mutandis, going back to when I was a kid, if you've been telling people for decades and decades, not to say centuries and centuries, we're going to do things this way, and then you say, just kidding, we're going to do it totally different now, and it's bad the way we were doing it. What do you think you're going to do to your credibility? How stupid do you have to be? And now, you know, if you put up signs, as I have seen on churches, go home, make a perfect act of contrition and a spiritual act of communion. Oh, all right. Oh, that's exactly what I'll do. See ya.
Yeah, I really fear the amount of hell to pay some of these people are going to have when it comes time for their particular judgment. It's absolutely just horrifying to think about how many people who are in desperate need of the sacraments are not being able to access them, or maybe they may have access to them, but they've been conditioned to not go because the zeitgeist right now, we'll say, it's mortifying. It really is.
Go ahead, brother.
Or even the ones that do go. For instance, earlier this year, I went to a friend's first communion, and there they had, like, on the sides where the altar rail would be, 2 giant plexiglass screens with, like, a drive-through window where the deacon and the priest, like, handed the Eucharist through this drive-through window, and then dropped it into the communicant's hand. You know, this is the way children are going to grow up seeing the Holy Eucharist treated. And that's going to form them in their belief on the dogma of the real presence, on what the Eucharist actually is. So even if people do go back, like, for instance, I think today the Metropolitan of Louisville, Kentucky, Archbishop Kurtz, decided to not take the advice of the governor in Kentucky and suspend masses in lockdown. Nonetheless, you can bet that those bishops are going to put forth procedures that are contrary to that teach something different about the real presence of the Holy Eucharist and other things as well.
That brings up that video. When you say that brings up that video that our friend Alberto had shared of Bishop Sanborn literally putting Purell on his hands after he touched the Eucharist.
That wasn't Sanborn. That was Flores down in Brownsville.
Flores. Right. Sorry.
Yeah,
that one kind of bothered me.
And he's one of them. You know, Bishop Flores just recently became, I guess, the chair of the Committee on Doctrine for the USCCB, and he's literally tweeted within the last few weeks saying that there should be a legal accommodation for people of same-sex attraction right after the Holy Father released that documentary, and other things, you know. And so it's all becoming a game.
Well, you know, it's important to remember that no bishop goes to hell alone. I
heard that one. That one's funny.
I'm sorry?
I said I've heard that one. That one makes me laugh because that means we follow the bishop. We follow him down.
Well, I mean, this is why we have to remember there's a twofold thing going on. One is a bad hierarchy, certainly a mitigating circumstance on the one hand. But on the other hand, we're still responsible for our own souls. And I mean, we're in a very unpleasant and annoying position. But as we said earlier tonight, we still have to pursue our own salvations and that of those around us. And we can't let these people, in a sense, get in our way. As I've had occasion to tell a couple of bishops with whom I've had rather heated words, remember, Your Excellency, you only have the power over me, that I choose to give you. Your authority over me is God-given, but your power over me is entirely voluntary. Now, of course, they generally are kind of confused because they don't know the difference between power and authority. Nobody ever went bankrupt betting on the ignorance of the clergy these days. But
I did want to ask you a question though, because you just wrote this really terrific book on Blessed Carl, which I highly suggest everybody go out.
You mean my book on Kaiser Karl? Yes. That wouldn't be Blessed Emperor Charles' Legacy of a Holy Emperor, would it?
That would be absolutely it. It's sitting here on my desk.
Well, this wasn't a plug, was it?
I got to give you a plug because if anybody hasn't read The Catholic Quest for the Holy Grail, Puritan's Empire, Star Spangled Crown, if you haven't read these books, you need to go out and read them, because one of the great things about having you on is that I have read everything you've written from back in your days with the Catholic Herald, which is borderline Catholic these days, to Crisis, to everything on Tumblr House and Catholicism.org. Just amazing stuff. But I wanted to ask your opinion on the brand. Well, it's not brand new. The committee, I believe, has been around for about 5 years, but Dolan was just made the committee chair of the Committee on Religious Liberty.
Whenever I think of Colonel Dolan, I get a little tired.
He is an exhausting man.
Well, he is.
He is the one who declared Bishop Robert Barron to be the next
Fulton
Sheen. Yeah.
If he were, I think that if Cardinal Dolan were a stage Irishman, he'd be great. You know, I mean, I always think of him at the Al Smith dinners and all that kind of thing, and you know, he'd kind of do the whole Irishman in vaudeville sort of thing. I think he'd be just great for that. You know, he'd be a wonderful performer. But you know, as a bishop, well, I don't know. I'm not entirely sure. He kind of burnt my grits a little bit some years ago when he declared that none of his predecessors had attempted to influence the composition of the St. Patrick's Day parade.
That sounds like, to borrow Jeremy Bentham's phrase, that's one of my favorites, that sounds like nonsense on stilts.
Well, it sure is. I mean, it's nonsense on stilts indeed. I mean, I'm so old, I remember Cardinal O'Connor making it very plain who was in and who was out. And if the parade didn't like it, they were out as a whole. I mean, and he says this with a straight face, you know. What can I tell you? He looks like a nice man. He looks like he enjoys a dram or 12. What can I say? Words fail me. I mean, this Committee on Religious Liberty thing, what is it supposed to be? What is it supposed to mean?
I would look to whatever the documents in Vatican II said about that topic specifically, and I would guess that that's what it's being framed as. And
actually, I read the introduction. It's actually on the USCCB website about what the particular committee is for, and it is for outreach to the other. I'm paraphrasing a little bit here because I don't have it in front of me, but it's outreach to other religious communities and not to act as if Catholicism is above everybody, and that you know, we should all work together towards some common good.
Really, does that include the old Roman Catholics?
I doubt it.
Well, no, I'm just curious because I mean, I'm looking here at the website. And he's got a lot of fun people here, apart from my friends at the ACLU, of course. Americans United for Separation of Church and State, they're a fun bunch. American Humanist Association, good one, very nice. Good to see them in on the deal. Christian Science, very, very good. Our Episcopalian friends, what's not to like? I mean, this is just, People for the American Way, another one of my favorites. Wow.
So is the group whose initials can form my favorite phrase to describe them, because they definitely are always watching, the American Dancing Ladies? Are they listed there?
Your speech you gave was just perfect.
Ah, well, thanks. It's what can I tell you? Stick around long enough, and every now and then you'll say something true. But no, honestly, it's a hard case, and I have to admit it's very depressing when I think of Cardinal Dolan. I think of the way he held up Archbishop Sheen's canonization for nothing.
I would actually expect that he was at least partially involved behind the that recent debacle involving all of that too.
Well, the most recent, yes, but I mean, I don't know. What I'm about to say is sheer speculation on my part, and it may be completely wrong. So let me give you that first. But honestly, I think he didn't want to give up the body because it was one of the things that drew people to St. Patrick's Cathedral. I venerated it, in the crypt there at St. Patrick's several times. And so I could imagine that he wouldn't want to let go of the body, but to torpedo the whole thing, just so he didn't have to give it up to begin with, and then to arrange for it to be torpedoed at the tail end, I guess out of spite. That's just, what do you say about a person like that, except have another Jameson's?
That we as a people, as a Catholic people in this country, must have done something bad to deserve that kind of leadership.
Well, we did. I mean, to be honest, I've said I was born the day Kennedy was elected. Well, that was the apogee of the kind of sellout Catholicism that we had. I mean, we made a deal basically that we really wouldn't try to evangelize the United States in return for being respectable.
Yeah, it reminds me of one of the most skin-crawling, inducing things I've ever seen on social media. It was some video of Ann Coulter talking about how Catholics became acceptable when we became Americans first. And it's, all I could think of was Ted Kennedy at that point.
Well, yeah, I mean, the whole Kennedy thing, same.
I did want to say, Brother Navarro does have a postulate coming today, so he's got to go. And I know Sir Charles over there is on a completely different time zone. Probably wants to end his day at some point.
He's broadcasting to us from the future. What, 7 hours in the future?
Yes, indeed. And believe me, it's as bad as the past.
But I did want to give you each a chance, and I know Anthony does too, to give you guys a chance to say some things. So, Brother Navarro, anything you want to say before you leave?
Keep hope. I mean, to keep living the Catholic faith, guys. I know a lot of our priests are going to be pretty shaky here pretty soon, compromising, all that kind of stuff. But I mean, keep the faith. Yeah.
It goes back to what I always tell people. You're going to be in a position probably where you're going to have to make the choice of receiving the sacraments from validly ordained priests who the church says is in union with Rome, even if there's some quibbles and disputes that are very heated and ongoing about certain things. You can either get your sacraments from them, or you can listen to people who might have a vested interest in not receiving the sacrament, in making sure you never set foot in a parish door of theirs. And it would be prudent to keep yourself with access to the sacraments. At least that's my thought. Charles, where can people find you? Besides, I will give an endorsement of the Tumbler House podcast. It is one of my favorites, and that's why I'm a patron of theirs. But it is one of my favorites, and I recommend you go and at least check it out. And if you've been checking it out, maybe consider becoming a patron of theirs and help me mop the the floor at the janitor level that I do there.
I certainly can only say I agree with you 100%. Also, when someone's giving a plug for you, you can't very well say they're wrong. But beyond that, I would just say that remember, at the end of the day, right now, we're not being arrested for our faith. We're not being shot in the street. We're not being sent to the gulag.
Oh, he dropped it.
What's that? Sorry.
Oh, your voice started sounding like RoboCop there for a bit.
Sorry.
No worries.
So, being here on the what's that? Being here on the very gates of the old Soviet bloc, I've gotten to a lot of people who really suffered for the faith in the bad old days. We're not going through anything. We feel like it. It's upsetting because it's the worst we've ever seen. But in the scheme of things, so far we've still gotten off lightly. It doesn't feel like that, I know, but it's true. And the thing I tell people when occasionally someone will say something to me like, "Oh, everything's so terrible. How can we possibly bring children into a world like this?" And my answer is the way our ancestors did during the Black Plague.
Yeah.
You figure we all descend from people who saw half to 2/3 of the neighborhood wiped out.
Yeah.
So be of good cheer, ladies and gentlemen. God's in his heaven, and if all isn't right with the world, it's an awful lot better than we have any right to deserve it to be.
Or as you said before, God is in control.
He is indeed. And, we have not here an abiding city anyway. So we've just got to do our best against the historic backdrop that he saw fit to put us in, to work out our salvation in fear and trembling. That's what we're here for. And my dad used to say that we were born in this time because it was the best time God knew from all eternity for us to save our souls in. And then he'd look at me and he'd shake his head and he'd say, "Of course, it doesn't speak very well for you and me that we were stuck in this time."
So Charles, I do need to email you because I would like to have you back on to discuss in depth more about the Americanism issue, because I believe it's a really big issue these days. And I just wanted to say thank you for being on with Anthony and I. It was terrific having you.
Well, you're welcome. Thank you very much for inviting me. I'd be happy to come back and chat about Americanism. Today there's as though we didn't have other things to do, there's a renewed argument between, for want of a better word, the neo-Americanists and the integralists on Twitter and online and so on and so on and so on.
Oh, yes.
So,
we're well aware.
Yes.
I'm sorry?
We're well aware of that argument.
I'm right at the forefront of that argument because I'm an open corporatist devotee of corporatism, and I speak a lot about the history of integralism and stuff like that. So I get a lot of flack from the libertarian Catholics, if you would.
Well, if it makes you feel any better, I went to Dolphus's grave recently, and I get a lot of fun about it over here because the great hero Karl Renner, the socialist, collaborated with Hitler. And so when I make comments along those lines about Dollfuss and so on, "Oh, well, he was terrible." Oh, I'm sorry, you misunderstand. He was murdered by the Nazis. Your man Renner was a collaborator.
Yeah.
There is a difference,
Yeah, people forget that. People forget that, he was a devout Catholic, and so were others of that time period and stuff like that. And they kind of lumped them in with a certain guy from, who didn't know how to cut his mustache properly. But yeah,
right.
Definitely. I will be emailing you later on today to see what days work for you.
All right, very good, gentlemen. God bless you both. I must run.
You have a nice day, Charles.
Will do. Bye-bye.
And
later.
See you later, brother. And
Right.
if you could stay on for a second.
Yeah.
We did have some issues with some audio and stuff. I'm sure that'll be cleared up once we go back to the replay. Unfortunately, during live stream, sometimes, especially on Saturday mornings, there's a lot of people live streaming. There's a lot of stuff going on. Anthony lives in a major area where there's a lot of people playing video games right now.
Well, it's not just that. I always describe my internet connection here being just in the way of picturing an office tower and it's all one internet system, except they do it for a neighborhood. But think of it as an old party line phone, and you're sharing your bandwidth basically with everybody in your neighborhood. And I have looked at getting better, but you see, it's the trade-off for living in a more rural area is some rural places have great internet. Others are my neighborhood. And I just deal with what I got. So it's one of the reasons why I haven't done that much streaming on my channel in the last month. I get really tired of the lagging out. The best times for me to do it are times when most of you aren't going to be available to watch. So, 4 a.m. streams aren't going to be happening.
It's a trade-off. I mean, I usually have I have a really good connection. I have a 1 gig connection, but I also have a T1. For those of you who don't know what that nerdy talk is, it's actually a dedicated internet connection that comes directly to me because I run my company mostly from my home. So I have to have connections that don't go down. But you do trade off. I pay a small fortune for that ability. Brendan knows about it. He called it old school T1. Yep. Old school T1 though, I tell you what, you don't get any lag, you don't get any issues, especially if it's a dedicated full instead of a fractional T. But I also do have fiber to my house, which again, I paid for, because I do live in a rural area as well. So I had to pay for fiber to my home. And so my internet bill is a lot more than what most people pay, but it is business. So I get to write it off as an expense. Couple of notes I want to talk about. Anthony and I are going to have another live stream next week. We're probably going to bounce around between the two channels for a while until we figure out if maybe it's advantageous, if you would, to have one channel just for live streams or what have you. But next week, we're going to have Dr. Robertson Jenis on. For those of you who aren't familiar with Dr. Robertson Jenis, he is a Catholic. He's done some great work in the science fields, mostly in geocentrism. And he worked on a movie called The Principal, and a couple other movies with Rick DeLeo and Wolfgang Smith. If you guys aren't familiar with Wolfgang Smith, I'm actually going to be doing a discussion about him on one of my shows.
So Kevin Reyes wants us to get the skater dude on.
That's not going to happen unless it's going to be a live stream with him and I in an octagon somewhere. It's not going to happen. He does not like me, and I do not like him. Anthony is more than welcome to do it alone, but I'm pretty sure Skater Bro is not going to. Him and I. It would just be really like 2 hours of him and I just like yelling at each other. So I don't think it would be. I don't think it would be very entertaining. YouTube
banned blood sports for a reason. The old internet blood sports stuff. If you know what that is.
Yeah, Jared says octagons are disordered because he likes boxing. So he likes the square ring instead. Boxing's kind of dead, bro. Nobody watches it.
Unfortunately, I strongly prefer old boxing to MMA, slap each other a little bit and then get each other into a painful hold until submission happens. I strongly prefer pugilism to whatever MMA is now.
But you know what? I've always been a little bit more of the MMA. I like the. You look. How could you not like Conor McGregor? I mean, come on.
Well, I like him as a character, but I was. Let me just say that I'm past due for another watching of the good Rocky movies.
You mean 1 and 2?
I'll say 1, 2, 3, and 4. 4, the music video with a little narrative between it, because that's what really Rocky 4 is. But after that, and I like Rocky 6, but I've never watched Rocky 5. I have it on near universal authority that movie is a catastrophe.
Wait, isn't 4 the one with Dolph Lundgren?
Yes.
Okay. Dolph is actually an interesting character. For those of you who don't know, Dolph Lundgren actually has a PhD in chemical engineering from MIT. He actually was originally going to be a chemical engineer, and he has, I think he has 150 IQ. I mean, it's like ridiculous. It's like
especially
ridiculous.
Considering the kind of characters he usually plays in movies.
Yeah, I mean, it's ridiculously high. I mean, his IQ is really, I mean, he's incredibly smart. If you ever get a chance, there's a couple of videos. You'll have to Google them. I don't think they're on YouTube. But where he's actually discussing chemical engineering, which is hysterical because you look at him and you're thinking, all these things. And in the movies, The Expendables, I believe it's in the second Expendables movie. They're sitting in a bar and he asks for a pen and he writes down a chemical formula and he goes Einstein's theory of special relativity, and he blows his nose and he goes, I made it better. And then Stallone turns around and goes, he has a PhD in chemical engineering. So it's kind of like a throw.
So somebody's saying, what about Creed? It's in the same universe. My problem with the Creed movies is that the Rocky movies are really about building it up and sort of giving you hope at the end. And it's about like not necessarily like being the victor in that sort of way the world cares about, but really in triumphing over your personal problems. And the Creed movies are all about tearing things down. And they're just not that good for that reason. Plus the woman who's like Creed's love interest in those movies, I've seen her enough other things that she helped ruin that I can't get past it. It's for me, for my money, Rocky Balboa was the last good one because it comes full circle if you watch that one.
Yeah, I liked the first couple. I liked the one with Mr. T, of course. That one was pretty entertaining. But I don't know. Some of those movies I look as like they're part of like a cultural thing, and so I look at them in that aspect, and I really like them for that reason. But then there's some that I just like look at and I go, meh, I could deal without this. It's like whatever, it's a movie.
Yeah.
But no, I like boxing. I don't want Jared. Jared's gonna get all mad at me now, and he's gonna like message me and go, "You suck, dude." No, I like boxing. Don't get me wrong. There has not been a heavyweight fight since Tyson left the ring that has been worth watching. To be honest,
he's coming back, right? He's gonna try. He's gonna try to pull a George Foreman.
I doubt it. I doubt it.
Notice I said try. I'm curious, and he still is at the top of the list of human beings that I would not want to get punched in the face by. But that being said, I'm not sure. Like if a man who should have stopped, if he hadn't had the problems he had, should have stopped boxing in like '95. If he hadn't had the problems he did, if 25 years later, it's a good idea for him to be back trying to do it again, and anything other than something for purely exhibition.
Yeah, I don't know. I like Tyson. I loved his fights. I thought his fights were some of the, a lot of people didn't realize. A lot of people thought that he was he wasn't a very technical fighter. A lot of people thought he was just this like beast. But I disagree. I think he was a good fighter. I think he just went crazy due to issues outside the ring.
Oh yeah,
really.
No. Tyson is one of the greats. Don't get me wrong. I just, 25 years ago, maybe 20 years ago, if he hadn't had his Holyfield moment, he probably should have hung it up and gone on to do acting and, sports commentary and everything else, although he probably doesn't have the voice for good sports commentary. But.
Actually, let's be honest. The best boxing movie is De Niro and Pesci, right?
Which one was that?
That's I gotta remember the name now. I can't remember the name right this second. Jared probably knows the name.
Is that Cinderella Man? They keep mentioning that in the
Raging Bull. That's it.
Okay.
Yes.
That's it. Raging Bull is the reason that Rocky didn't win an Academy Award is because they didn't compare it to everything else coming out that year. They compared it, I think, to Raging Bull, and that's why he didn't win. Which I always like to point this out to people. Stallone was nominated for Academy Awards for screenwriting and acting for, I believe, that in the first Rambo film. Imagine a world where he had won like a Best Actor Academy Award at that period. How different his trajectory would have been, and how probably very different Hollywood would have been as a result. And it kind of makes me sad. Although that would mean that we would live in a world without Demolition Man and.
Yeah, we can't do without Demolition Man. And actually, I know it was like not a good version, but I loved the Judge Dredd with Stallone. I mean that movie I could watch 100 times.
That movie's a pretty good solid parody of Judge Dredd.
It's so campy. It's like it's so incredibly campy that you can't not like it. It's just like, it's that perfect level of cheese that is like, it's just above a B movie, but it's still got enough cheese where it could fall right into that B movie realm. So I definitely, I love that one. And I like Demolition Man too.
I was thoroughly amused that for some reason there's a random scene where a guy gets out of his car and mid-90s radio-friendly industrial metal starts coming out of his car. And remember, this is like 200 years in the future. So I'm just, I just had a good laugh because, of course, you know, they had to pay to have current music in the movie. Thanks for the super chat, Colin McMenamin. It's appreciated.
Yeah, it's. I just wanted to say a few things. I wanted to thank Quack for getting me in touch with Bishop Williamson. So thank you very much for that.
That is something we're working on for his channel, is to have a conversation with him. So stay tuned for the formal announcement of that. But that'll be that'll be a very. Be careful. Probably be ready for some horse pill sized red pills on that from that stream. Aaron Hook says if Stallone had won an Oscar for Rocky, we would have been safe from the remake of Get Carter. That's true also. That is true. I don't know. Anything else you wanna say, Patrick, before we call this a day? Hello? Huh.
No, I'm here. I'm sorry. I had to walk out and
Oh, okay.
And talk to the wife there for a second. But Quack got me in touch there. My buddy Steve, for those of you who don't know, Steve runs the Sensus Fidelium channel. He's a friend of ours. He got me in touch with Dr. Brian McCall. I'm also speaking to Michael Hoffman for us. Ant went out and made the connection with Charles. So obviously we're going to have Charles back on to talk about Americanism, but we're also going to have Michael Hoffman. What I'd like to do is really get Michael Hoffman and Brian McCall in at the same time, being that they both wrote books on the history of usury in the Catholic Church. So I'd really like to have them both on at the same time, which I think would be an amazing conversation on Catholic economics. Mm-hmm. The other one, somebody did ask me about Paul Gottfried in my channel. Paul Gottfried, for those of you who don't know, he was one of the original paleo conservatives with Pat Buchanan and others. The issue with him is he's a lot older, and he's very hard to get to do these things, but I am going to try. Wim Hof, I'm talking to. That's another one that I've not mentioned. Update with Father Gerke. I was waiting until everything kind of slowed down. Elibias with his father. I didn't want to put him in a position to do a live stream and all this and that with all the issues going on with his father's health right now. So once that calms down, we're gonna talk again. But we have been in contact via text, pretty much at least a couple times a week. But Wim Hof, definitely, Wim Hof is everywhere. He definitely likes to get his message out. So we're definitely going to have Wim Hof on. It's going to be a great time. The next couple of I'd say months for Anthony and I as far as guests. We're really trying to have as many of these awesome guests on that we possibly can. And absolutely, I will not have Voris on. Somebody had said scrolling Michael Voris. That's not going to happen. Purely due to the fact that I'm probably going to be suing him because he slandered me in public. I don't think having him on a show would be a good idea. Michael Jones, thinking about it, but I really want to have a different
private name says, is this a Catholic, Protestant, or Christian channel? This is a traditional Catholic channel. I don't know what you mean by a Christian channel. Catholics are the original Christians. No offense to the Protestants who might be listening. I'm just curious. So, yeah. Mr. Baker's like, Voris, look at my popcorn.
It's not going to happen. That would be worse. A matter of fact, I think it would be more tame to have Skater Bro on than it would be to have me and Voris speaking. But yes, somebody said if you do Dr. Jones not a live stream. If I get Dr. Jones on, I really want to get the conversation toward one thing, because he does go on a lot of shows, and this is not a dig on Dr. Jones at all. I want to make myself very clear. He goes on a lot of shows, and he speaks about 2 or 3 topics a lot, and really kind of bringing him on and just kind of reiterating that it's not really something new or exciting. So I really want to have a couple conversations with Dave Riley to see like where we can really steer that conversation, what kind of conversation we could have with him that would be more apropos to the channel and to everybody listening as well.
All right. I think we're good for now though. So you know where you can find Trad Patrick at. You can find him over at Rights and Duties. Do you have a video going up today, or do you have one going up on Monday?
No, but I am doing one tomorrow, which I don't normally do because the whole thing with Voris and everything it has to be addressed. And I don't feel that Twitter is the best place to address it. It's really not, because it just becomes a bunch of bants back and forth. So I am doing a video tomorrow on that particular topic, and then Monday we're back into fascism and talking about some of the Catholic adaptations of nationalism through fascism and stuff like that. So.
And I'll be working over the weekend on something about ecology liturgy. So watch for that in the coming week. That'll be a hoot. So anyway, thanks for joining us today, guys, and we'll see you in the coming week and hopefully next weekend in the chat. Anyway, God bless and have a nice weekend.